Hello, Chris. You're back on the
Hello,
show.
Good morning to you.
And it's quite early, isn't it?
It's it's earlier for you actually than it is for me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, slightly. Yeah. So
feels early enough for me, but
we're both early birds, aren't we? So anyway, here we go.
it's shining, so it's all good.
Well, no, it's not here. And of course, it's the coronation day when we're recording this. In fact, this might be out today as well. So,
Okay.
So we'll see where we go. But I thought there's a couple of things that obviously we could chat about today. Obviously, we're going to talk about Blues Camp because that's coming up in July.
Yeah.
But I've been sort of pondering, there's always this thing about musicians and buying new gear, right?
Yeah.
If you got the money. But this is a sort of the antithesis of this, really, I think. So it's like, don't buy new gear. It's something I've really been sort of pondering. Because we're sort of, as part of this was sparked by the fact that you bought yourself a new old car.
Yeah. And it's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, so what have you got?
Right, so I've got an old Range Rover. So the model is called a P38. It's 2001. It's a diesel 2.5 litre engine. It is the most basic of those Range Rovers that came out. Its model is called a DT. It's just a diesel turbo. It doesn't even have leather seats. Just about has electric windows, and that's it. Actually, in fact, I even had to get the radio replaced because it still had the old cassette radio in it.
Oh, right.
Which was very nice, but no good, unfortunately. Yeah, and I bought that simply because I needed a big car in order to lug all the instruments around and keyboards and so on. And because of where I live, I need something that's quite big, because daily life here does require you to have either a big car or a trailer, one of the two. And looking at all the electric options, I'm all for sort of that, but the excuse me, the scenario with charging means it's just impossible.
And to be honest, I don't think the technology's right at the moment.
No, I'm not. No, I think for me the idea is great, but
yeah, the idea is great.
There's a lot of negatives actually on the
absolutely. Yeah, if you sit down and really cost it out, it's just absurd.
Yeah, there's no way I could afford. Which is the other thing. I couldn't afford a new car, even under lease. When you look at the way you're tied in. So, in fact, old cars out here in south of France are very expensive because people keep their cars until they just have completely run into the ground, and even then, they are sold on as sort of spares or repair. So the nearest thing I could find, other than the Range Rover, was a Toyota 4Runner. I think it was a 4Runner or Hilux equivalent, which was 30 years old. The bodywork was okay, although there was a lot of moss growing all over it. The shape was fine, and the actual engine itself had been played with, and there was on the advert there was a new turbo fitted and this, that, and the other. But the interior was just blown away. There was not really a lot left. But it did look like my dog had previously lived in it for the last 30 years. And that was up for €6,500. So just under £6,000 for 30-year-old Toyota Hilux.
Incredible.
It's ridiculous. For England, that is ridiculous money. And it's for the same reasons. People use these cars, and they just keep them going and going and going and going. And the other thing is, if you, for example, if you had a car that's worth a couple of £1,000 in England, if you put new tyres on it, it's still worth a couple of £1,000, but it's just a bit more saleable. But out here, well, you add the value to the tyres. Yeah, you add the value of the tyres to the car, so the car's now worth, £2,500 or something. It's just a different sort of mentality of thinking.
Well, this is strange because it's completely the opposite when it comes to houses out there. Because houses are incredibly cheap, really, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. But again, people, I'm sure people realise this in England. The English way of life partly depends on buying and selling houses. That's how you go up in the world. That's how my parents went up in the world. You buy a house, you sit on it for 5 or 6 years, it goes up in value, and then you move off, and you go and get someone slightly bigger, and you remortgage, etc., etc. And England always suffers from, if there was a housing crash.
Yes. Well, that's of course, because you get governments who play the game of keeping the housing prices up. Otherwise, there'd be a revolution.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not like that in every country, as you start to find out around. So in France, you buy a house, and that's your house. You're done, kind of thing, and you sit in it until the mortgage is paid off, and then that's it. So actually, you can buy a bigger house to start with because the housing prices aren't so much. You get a nice, decent-sized garden, but then land is a bit more plentiful out here, and that's it. Now, that's not to say people don't move house, because of course they do, but it's not. Yeah,
but the economy doesn't work on
houses,
on the house market. Yeah, exactly.
And
so the point that what I was thinking about, you saying that, so it's all about perception, right? That feeds the idea of what something's worth.
Yeah.
And of course, I always encourage pupils, however nice it is to buy a brand new guitar, not to do that. To start the whole cycle of looking and keeping an eye out for what there is, and learning about instruments and amplifiers and all the rest of it. Because of course you can pick things up, ironically, like you're saying with regard to certain aspects of French life, but obviously not to do with cars, for an absolute song. So for instance, as you know, I collect guitars from the point of view of being able to sort of move them on to kids, on free loan, so that they can start playing. And I do the same thing with amplifiers, and people donate stuff to me, and I've had incredible things donated. So I'm looking at a PV Bandit, which is an old style, bloody heavy combo amp. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. It needs a good hoover, probably, and brushing over, the old trick of brushing over the size of the amp with an old shoe brush to bring it, to make it look like it's sort of new. It needs that doing to it. There's nothing wrong with this amp. It's been sitting in the garage for about 10 years, apparently. But it's absolute, like a horse, like a Shire horse. But it weighs a ton, right? So a lot of people don't like that. Whereas in the past, you didn't bother with it. You needed to go in. Well, you didn't need to go in a gym, basically. You just have to pick this bloody thing up and down a few times. And somebody else gave me, well, the same person gave me a Fender Deluxe combo. And new, they're like 900 quid. And it's as new. But again, surplus to requirements, which was an amazing gift. But you can pick things up, and if you can haggle, if you can learn to haggle, which we don't do very well in this country anymore, you can find great things, to the point that if you look at the bottom end of stuff, people are giving stuff away more or less, not because it's charity, but because they just want to clear space.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And it just needs a shift in our thinking, right? Here. Back to what we would have done years ago. Because we've become far more materialistic, I think, in my lifetime in this country. And I'm interested in this from the point of view of creativity. So this is really what I was interested in talking to you about, because I know you share a lot of my ideas, and I might have polluted your ideas with mine over the years, to be frank. But there is that sort of thing of being able to make do, which brings me to a point I wanted to talk to you about now, about this, about the British Army in comparison, in comparison to the American Army. So off you go, Chris.
God, to
make do.
Make do. I literally actually have to be careful what I say. Okay, so let's say pre-deployment training to make do. So before you step foot in a foreign country, I can speak from experience of there not being enough heavy weapon kits. So 50 caliber guns, mortars, etc. So what happened was, if you are the chosen one, you go off and you do the trainer course, whilst the rest of your unit is going through their infanteering skills or their normal pre-deployment training. Those weapon systems didn't arrive until you were in country. So you did or one person or a couple of people did their training course on them, but there aren't enough to go around. They were all in the country you were going to, because there's not enough. So there's no spare capacity. And then when you arrive, eventually 2 or 3 of those systems get allocated to your unit, and those people that have done the training very quickly get everybody else up to speed, which is just nuts, because you're already there, you're already in a war zone, and you're doing your training whilst on the job doing it. So,
mind you, there is a motivational factor there, isn't there?
Yeah, you do feel very how does this work, where's the instructions, and how do you do that? That comes very quickly. And it's the same with, everything. Vehicles are the same. There's not enough vehicles. So you do your training on the old rubbish stuff that's left back in the UK, and then when you get there, hopefully you get allocated something that works, or is at least, was it at least built within the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a bit of a joke and it's quite funny, and then other times it gets very serious. Especially when you're coming to equipment that's there to defeat IEDs, improvised explosive devices. So all your jamming gear, which actually, there's lots of it. Each nation has their own version of the same sort of kit, but you just don't go anywhere without that providing you with some sort of bubble or otherwise, anyone with a remote control key fob that might open a garage door can link that to some explosives, stand back 100 meters, and then press the button and off you go. So the idea is you're in a bubble with a box of tricks that defeats.
Yeah, that jams it.
Kind of signal, yeah. And when there's not enough of that stuff around, you do get a bit twitchy, shall we say, and annoyed.
But the thing I was interested in is that obviously because of that, there is somebody somewhere, maybe the engine, some sort of sapper is working out how the hell do we do this and fix this with what we've got. Because that, you know, as you say, the Americans just can pick the phone up, or, well, not even pick the phone up anymore. You know what I mean? And it will be shipped in. Whatever it is that's required comes in. And that, you know, you can think, right, okay, if you got the gear, that's brilliant. But there is something in that mentality of looking at a situation and working out what the hell do we do here? Right.
Yeah, and I think the Brits, when you get used to that, you just get on with it.
Yes.
You don't stand back and then complain and write a letter,
no.
cry in the corner or whinge, or because you can't do that. So you just get on and do what you can do, and then that's where you start. It becomes like internal trading. So when you watch films like Kelly's Heroes with Clint Eastwood and co, and he's you know, he wants an artillery barrage to happen at a certain time so that he can duck in between the lines, and in order to make that happen, he hands over a crate of whiskey and a single gold bar which represents the gold he's going to steal. Actually, that sort of stuff does happen. If you want your body armor, the latest generation of body armor, and there aren't any, there's none knocking around, but you know, another nation's got some, but they happen to be on a dry camp.
Yeah.
And as in, there's no alcohol, but you happen to have a bottle of scotch.
Yeah.
Off you go, and you find that QM's department, and you have a quiet word and it just becomes a friendly trade, to the point of you go again. Okay, what do you want now? What have you got? And that's what you need to do. And anyone who says it doesn't happen is lying.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I'm quite interested in that, because I don't think that's a new thing with the British Army. That's something I think we've always done, because we've always been, you know, and it's also true with the Royal Navy, because it goes through the periods of time with, you know, there's no investment, and then there'll be a lot of investment. But in those times where there's no investment, that sort of thing of having to make do makes people quite, you know, they innovate.
Yeah.
And there's always that thing of, because, you know, you innovate because you have to. You don't generally innovate because you don't have to. You see, this is the point I'm getting at here. Because what I'm beginning to notice within, you know, within education is that innovation with young kids. Okay, they're good with the tech, but their ability to innovate within themselves is not as good as it was. I don't think it is. Anyway, it's not. I mean, there's, you know, this is a broad stroke thing, because I'm not saying everybody's in the same boat. I'm not saying that at all. But generally speaking, you don't see the type of things that the kids do. No. So a little story here. When I moved back from Cornwall with my parents, so I was 11. I wasn't 11, I was 12. Not that makes an awful lot of difference. But I moved to a place in Dartford. And Dartford was, you know, Dartford's an interesting place. Not a place you want to go back to live anyway. But an interesting place to come from, basically, in the words of Keith Richards. But there was a village hall in the road that I lived in. And I walked past there one day, and there was a band playing in this village hall. And I poked my head around the door, as you do. And in fact, I sort of wandered in. I didn't know who the kids were, but they were older than me. And they were pretty much all right about, you know, people sort of coming in and watching. And I think they probably had, you know, a couple of guitars, in my view, but probably only one amp, which everybody was plugged into. But the drummer was playing on cardboard crisp boxes. He had no drums. So from what I can remember, he was playing like playing on pots and pans.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, either because he couldn't get his kit there, because again, you couldn't necessarily, you have to walk everything in because nobody had a car. But it was that ability to innovate. And he was actually really good. I mean, they sounded great. He was playing on cardboard boxes. And you just go like, yeah. And that seemed normal.
Yeah. And I bet they were able to concentrate much more on what they were trying to do.
Oh my God, yeah.
Fiddling with knobs and buttons, going, oh, wow.
And nobody wanted to try the latest effects pedal out because it didn't have any.
Yeah.
You know. So you see, what interests me about that is what that state of mind of being able to do the thing anyway, even if you haven't got the gear.
Yeah.
I think is really important because it's problem solving, right? And we're not very good at problem solving anymore. I mean, I hate sort of quoting scientific experiments because, to be honest, I think even they're suspect because they're out of context often. You know, when people go, oh, so this has been researched and this and that, and it's bullshit. Excuse my language for the most part. But because it's out of context, right? Especially when it comes to things like behavior, human behavior. But when you see, there's one particular thing that there was assumed, you know, it's assumed that because of the way that, I don't know how they did this bit of research, but people in the Victorian period and Edwardian period were better problem solvers than we are. And you think, well, they must have been, because you couldn't just go out and buy you know, you had to get something repaired. And it meant that probably you had to repair it. And things were also built to be repaired. Right? And if you couldn't afford the thing, you had to find a way of doing the thing without, you know, without machinery.
Yeah.
So that naturally makes you more competent of thinking of a solution or thinking a way around a problem. So in actual fact, sometimes the answer is not to assume that you have a problem with that thing, that there's another way of thinking about it, so that what you assume is the problem that stops you doing the thing isn't there anymore, which is another thing that we don't do. You know, I can't go out tonight. You know, what's that Smith song? I can't go out tonight because I haven't got anything suitable to wear or whatever. You know, it's like, well, don't think about having to wear anything in particular. And then you can go out, can't you? So, you know, when it comes to like creativeness, and this is something I really want to sort of pursue within Blues Camp actually this year, it's about what do you need to create with? Because you know what it's like, don't you? We get people turning up with all the gear and no idea. I mean that in the nicest possible way. No, they have an idea, but they have so many pedals and an amp that has to be used because it's the amp that they get their sound from. Right? That actually that's stopping them creating. And you've seen this.
Well, there's an interesting thing at the moment within gear, where everything you can go and buy that's new is it's just a reissue of something that came out 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's got to the point, I mean, it's not a bad thing because it's often cheaper, but I want to give some examples because it's something that I'm sort of following. So Neumann, the microphone manufacturer, have made some very famous mics. One is a Neumann U87, the go-to vocal mic throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s and still currently. You know, it's just the mic that any serious studio has in their microphone locker. But it's £2,500 new. and the new ones are apparently not quite as good as the ones that came out in the 70s and so on. There are now multiple companies, one of which is called Warm Audio, who are very good companies, that are doing their own version of this microphone, but selling it for 600. So Warm's is called a WA, and then funnily enough, 87.
Yeah, it's weird, that, isn't it? Good marketing.
Yeah. Okay. Now, and this goes on with microphones massively. An AKG C12 original mic will sell for between $10,000 and $20,000 because they are the holy grail of sort of microphones. But again, Warm Audio and many others do a C12 clone for about $1,000. It looks similar. It's a tube amp. It's got a tube in it, and so on. I recently managed to buy a Roland JC40, which is based on the JC, the Jazz Chorus amps that came out in the late 70s, 80s, that are sort of famed by the Police, and they were manufactured, and then they kind of went out of fashion, and then they're back in, and Roland realized that, and so came out with a new lineup of that stuff, but reissued and slightly tweaked, but the same kind of badge and logo and everything on it. It's the same with keyboards. In fact, Roland D50s, Korg M1s, Yamaha DX7s, all those sort of infamous synths, they cost more now secondhand than they did when they were new. People are chasing for those sounds. So that there's very little, in a way, of new stuff. It's really just regurgitated, repackaged, either smaller because of the way chips and technology has developed, looks different, shinier box, whatever. But it's the same stuff that's in shops now as there was 30, 40 years ago.
Well, again, if you think about the history of the guitar, there's really only 3 guitar shapes that you sort of go, you can boil it down to three electric guitar shapes. The Les Paul, the Telecaster, and the Fender Strat. I mean, there are lots of others, but if you think about all the guitars that are made, they tend to fall into those categories of being either a Strat shape, so the PRSs and all that sort of stuff, or the sort of Les Pauls, or the Telecaster, right? And you sort of go, so Leo Fender got it right. It's almost straight off the bat. It's amazing, incredible. In the 50s, and Les Paul, who was a great inventor as well as being one of the great electric guitar players, so a similar sort of thing. And you sort of go, right, so there's some things then that don't really improve, or they don't need to be improved. But then the interesting point is that if you can get away from the fashionable bit, like you're saying, you've got an old whatever microphone, Neumann or something or other, then you're sitting on basically a block of gold, aren't you? Platinum, because it's, the idea of it is probably worth more than the actual thing is itself. So what I'm interested in is the sort of slightly sideways thing of realizing the value of something that nobody else realizes the value of. And so in that way, Jack White of the White Stripes, he used to buy these guitars in old junk shops, plastic guitars and stuff like that were very retro. So that some 1950s American company had made something, but you could pick them up because they were junk, do some work on them, and then use them for gigging. And then, of course, then they get reissued
Yeah.
People are buying something that you sort of think, well, you know, it's a guitar. It's probably not the nicest guitar to play. But if it's cost you nothing, more or less, you know, $5 or something in a junk shop, it's worth having. Right? So it's that mentality of thinking about those things. And, you know, effects pedals it's a perfect example of that, because people, you know, they buy something and then they don't really use it and then they sell it. So you buy something that's virtually never been used for a fraction of the cost, as long as it's not the, you know, the thing that everybody's going for at the time. That's an interesting thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that mentality then of spotting something, I think, is a transferable skill. So I'm going to sort of switch tack here a little bit. There's an NLP thing. If you're dealing, you know, you're trying to sort somebody's, they've got a problem about something that they're doing. You often realize that the thing that's causing a problem for people is that they've got something that they do that's misplaced. And there's a classic example of this, which was said to me while I was sort of NLP training, which was this guy was saying, well, my wife is an interior designer and she can do these incredible things where she can walk into a room and then see the objects in the room and change the color of the walls in her head, right? And then she can change the colors of the walls in her head again, and then change all the fabrics inside the room in her head. He said, but it makes her a nightmare to go out for dinner with, because she does it with the menu. So she can't decide what she's going to have.
Yeah.
Because she makes all these comparisons between things. Well, that's a great metaphor for what generally happens with people when they have a problem. They've got a great skill that's a problem in the wrong place. And the answer to that is often that they've got another skill somewhere else that solves the problem that they've got, you know.
Yeah.
And you often have to just transfer that. But what people often do with NLP is that they get them to model something else that's outside themselves. You know, a skill that somebody else they've got, that they have to sort of take that. And that works, but I think it's longer. So when you look at somebody's musical skill, having people acquire something that's, you know, quite easy to acquire, like being able to spot an opportunity. Like, I can pick up a guitar for next to nothing because it's being sold, you know, and this guy's it's been up for sale for 6 months. So obviously if he's offering, you know, if he wants 200 quid, but he hasn't got rid of it, then I could offer him 100 quid. He might go, no, but 120 will do. Right.
Yeah.
That mentality is the same thing as looking around and spotting something in a piece of music that was going on in the 1960s that you could take and it becomes the beginning of a new song, or a way that people thought about how you put, you know, you recorded guitars in the 1970s type of thing. I know this goes on anyway, but you know what I mean? It's that ability to think, not because so-and-so is recording like that now. It's almost like, well, how did Joe Meek record in his London flat? By dangling a microphone off the light in the middle of the sitting room, you know, but he recorded a vocal in the bathroom type of idea, right? And it's going back to a way of thinking, you know. Would you record, out there. Do you? Because I know we've spoken about.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a sweeping statement, but French musical attitudes that are doused in culture can be slightly problematic at times.
Yeah, and they are problematic to this minute. Yeah, is it again? I mean, I'm in danger of sort of repeating myself, but here everything is kind of everybody wants everything scored out exactly. There's no room for free thinking.
Yeah,
as you play, there's not the skill, and this is not my opinion. This seems to be ever becoming more and more. This is actually how it is. People are very well trained. It's got nothing to do with the ability to play.
It's to do with the mindset.
Yeah, people cannot play in a band and then be told you need to look at each other for when you are going to change into the next section, or someone will communicate to you that it's like, well, no. I need to know how many bars we're going to be playing this for exactly, so that I can then relax and just enjoy playing, which I kind of get, but it's, life is not like that when you're playing. And when you are recording, you can get so bogged down of something exactly that you don't actually get on and do the recording itself, because you're just talking about it and sometimes arguing about it, and then what if, and then maybe this, and then maybe that, and the minutes and the hours tick by and you haven't done anything. So it is it is very, very different. Like I said,
now here's a point. This is interesting, because this is what I was sort of saying about what the style of thinking that leads to, it's not in a pocket. So you get a style of thinking that will pervade. It's the territory, really, right? And it pervades everything. So going back to this idea about the innovation that's required in the British Army to deal with the fact they haven't got the gear. Another historical metaphor, really. I've got to be careful, because obviously I could be wildly off the mark, but if you look at the history of the Second World War, First World War, Second World War, and the French army, by the time we got to the Second World War, the French army was the best equipped, probably the best army in the world at that point, on paper, right? On paper, they had the gear, they had the men, they had the forts and everything, they had the Maginot Line and all the rest of it. But of course, the thing was, they were expecting to fight the last war again, with exactly what would happen. And of course, they couldn't innovate. And of course, the Germans weren't going to fight the same war. It was a war of movement, which obviously the First World War wasn't, certainly not in the middle section, the biggest part that we understand of the First World War. The end was, and the beginning was, but not the middle bit. But of course, so what happened was that they just were sort of not able to see the situation and respond. So this is what I'm interested in with music, because really what you're talking about is exactly what we would think of as British rock and roll, British rock music. It's all about innovation. It was, I don't know if it is now, but you know what I'm sort of saying? It's like you're playing, you've got some American music, which was basically British music, which then, ended up with the black black music in America, and then came back. And we obviously sort of recognized what was working in that music. And then it was shipped back out to the Americans. But the point about this is that it became the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all the rest of it, because it sort of came back and there was incorporated in other things that we were doing. And you see that again and again and again. So we end up with, reggae being ingested into British music, and things like heavy metal being part of, it was the industrial heartland of Britain, musically expressed, and it came from Sheffield. Yeah, that's where we had the steel mills. It's all about that. So you look at that and you think, that's amazing. That's amazing. And okay, this is a rather sweeping statement, but the French are very thoughtful people.
Yeah.
And that is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm just going to plug in because I've had a beep.
Yeah, because there is a little bit of sort of buzzing going on your phone, which is, I think, is a signal thing. Right? That sounds quite interesting. It sounds like some sort of.
Yeah, it is strange. It is strange when you're not used to that, and then you're thrust into that situation. Because yes. There's a bass player friend of mine who laughs at me when I turn around and look very confused at everyone else, and they look at me as if to say, well, why are you confused? And I turn around and say, just play the effing song.
Yes.
Yes. There's only 4 chords in it, and you're arguing about whether this should be that and this, and just play.
Oh, you're dropping out, Chris. Hang on. Yeah, okay. Right. Okay, so I'm just saying we had a little bit of problem with the signal there. And there is a bit of buzzing on your side. But so you were saying about this thing, when you're playing, and it's only 4 chords, but they're sort of, it's all about the intricacies of the thing, which is sort of bizarre, because I think the most important thing about music is that you should never be intellectualizing about that stuff. That's what happens in general conversation, musically. And I think, I was saying to some people last week, because I was running a jamming session here with some people that are learning, right? And I said, the thing about music, life generally is either you're cooking or you're baking. So if you're cooking, you throw everything in the pot. And if you're a good cook, you can produce food with whatever there is. But baking is a different thing. If you don't get the consistencies right, it's a disaster. And classical music is like baking, right? Everybody does their thing and they're putting their little bit of the ingredient into the thing, and it's got to be correct. You can't have too much cello, right? You can't have too much brass. It's got to be exactly what's written. But really, contemporary music is cooking. It's a jambalaya type of thing. It's stick it all in, right? It's like a stew. And I think the problem is because people, when they get very, very clever, they think cooking is baking. And it isn't.
There's only so many times you can stop and then, all right, let's go back to the beginning and try it again before it's gone off.
Exactly.
And you lose I don't want to do any cooking or baking or anything anymore because it's taking too long and I'm too hungry,
Yeah, I'll just go out and
or I've lost my appetite. I want to
Yeah.
That's how it works. And the skill set seems to be different, but it's and the word skill set is a bit strange because everybody has that, you know, same musical skill set. So maybe skill set is this mentality.
No, it's right, because it's like saying they've got all the tools, but that doesn't mean to say you can use them. You see, and that's an important. I think that's an important thing. So, just sort of very briefly, because your signal's sort of all over the place at the moment. So with Blues Camp, then, this is one of the things that I know we do this a lot, where we start putting people on their back foot, stopping them doing things habitually, and getting them to reassess what they do when they perform, and actually then not to think about what they do once they're in that state of change, you know. And that's all obviously that's a difficult thing, because you can't put it on paper how we do this, because a lot of it is literally understanding, you know, again, it's cooking, right? It's seeing what ingredients there are in that lineup and how you could put that together in such a way that it works as a meal, you know, as a musical meal. You know, and understanding that certain things are sometimes quite problematic, but it can still create something very interesting. Yeah, cool stuff. So, what exciting things have you got lined up for this weekend? Obviously, you're not going to be sitting watching the coronation, I'm guessing.
Well, I just wanted to say two things. Well, just picking up on what you said about the Blues Camp. One of the activities for one of the bands that come out to France is going to be stopping the pauses in between songs, where you go from, right, I finished this song, and then, you know, the singer goes, thanks very much for a round of applause, if, you know, hopefully you get a round of applause, and the next song is called, or whatever, or that person feels they've got to talk for a few seconds, which generally can go on for 5 or 6 minutes, whilst everyone was dancing, then goes to the bar, and the rhythm of the gig just goes up and down like a yo-yo, and so we're going to be dealing with that and just building on the confidence that someone just needs to start the song. Like,
exactly.
Come back, just play the song. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone has to start together. It could be the drummer hopefully will feel particularly confident of a song. That's why I'm just going to start the pattern. And whilst he's playing a drum pattern on his own, the singer could be chatting away and saying, right, the next song is called blah, blah, blah. And, you know, the bass just happens to come in, just playing a single line in that key of that song, just getting a groove going. And then when they're all ready, someone decides, right, here we go, 2, 3, 4, and off you go into the song.
Totally.
You can't plan it. You can't write it down. You can't script it. You can't score it. You can't even rehearse it. You just need to get on and do it. And know that if someone in your band starts playing on their own, you don't have to all turn around and go, oh my God, what are you doing? Oh, I'm lost. Well, what's going on now? Just go with it.
Exactly.
Just enjoy the moment and get on with what, you know, playing that gig, doing the performance. Because it's theatre. You don't stop in between a scene of a theatre. You know, when you're at the theatre and then we go, oh, thanks, I'm just going to introduce the next scene. You know,
exactly. That's a good point, that, Chris. You said that you had a couple of points, is there not?
Yeah, so the next thing this weekend, well, in the village, there's a flower festival. So I teach at the local primary school. So the primary school are going to do a little performance, or some of the kids. So there's a little band there. So there's a drum kit all set up, which was set up last night, and some keyboards, and they're going to play when the Saints go marching in. which is great for them. And then there's a French song as well, which they're going to play, which all the kids sort of locally know, should sing along with. And then in the evening, in the Salle de Fête, which is like the village hall, the band that I play in we're gonna sit down and eat with all the organisers of this festival, and then we'll play to them at the end. So it's a very typically sort of French sort of bank holiday weekend. It's bank holiday out here as well.
All right. Good stuff. See, the thing is, there's lots of stuff that I think is wonderful about what goes on in France with regard to the arts. I think it's absolutely brilliant, you know, and it'd be nice if we had a little bit more of that over here, to be honest.
Yeah, they approached me, Chris, can you organise some music in the evening? And that was it. That was the conversation. My response was a couple of days later when I phoned round and everyone's available. It's just yes, and that's all they need to know.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, right. We'll call it a day there because your signal's a bit all over the place. It's quite funny because it looks like you're in something that looks like the phone's in a cupboard.
Well, it's in the kitchen. It's not fun.
Anyway, have a great weekend, Chris. And you know, I'm teaching throughout the whole of the coronation, so there's obviously a whole bunch of people that aren't interested in it either. But you know, we could all check it out. Make sure we put his crown on straight and everything. But anyway, it's all good. Good to speak to you.
Yeah, good to speak to you too.
Speak to you soon, right?